Imagine living in a world where a single rumour, an odd look from your neighbour, a strange dream or even a sudden storm could mean your death. In Scotland between the 16th and 18th centuries, thousands of people, mostly women, would be accused of making pacts with the devil. And they weren't just put on trial, they were tortured until they confessed to impossible crimes, flying through the night, summoning demons, cursing entire villages. And once you were branded a witch, your fate was sealed. Execution by fire. This is a story of the Scottish witch trials, one of the darkest, most terrifying chapters in history. Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel, or welcome to my channel if you're new here. I hope you're all doing so well. Welcome back to another true crime and makeup episode. Oh yeah. Happy spooky season! I am so excited. Happy 1st of October, the best time of the year. Well, October to December. Halloween and Christmas, I live for both of them. But I've been in spooky season mode since September the 1st. Honestly, probably well before. I'm in spooky season year round, okay? I confess. Today, we are covering the Scottish witch trials. We are sitting down with another homicidal history. That's right, another homicidal history, so close together. But last year, I covered the Salem witch trials, which I loved covering, so interesting. And you asked for the Scottish witch trials, so we're doing it today. Just a quick disclaimer, because people get very confused about what my accent is, and I understand it, I get it, I know why you're confused. So I just want to say that I am Scottish, and in this video, you will hear me say a lot of time the word witches, okay? And I just want to confirm, I am not saying wet cheese, I'm saying witches, like the things that cackle and fly through the sky, the one in the Wizard of Oz with the flying monkeys. Witches. My accent changes a lot of words, but if I start saying witches, it sounds like I'm saying wet jizz, and I think that's just wrong for everyone involved. But now we got that out of the way, I'm not saying wet cheese. If you are new here, hi, my name is Anna. I am a certified yapper, and one day I decided I'm going to come on the internet, I'm going to yap about true crime, and now I find myself doing it twice a week, every single week on a Wednesday and Sunday. So, with that being said, if true crime is your jam, I highly suggest you subscribe. Get the notification bell on because, well, like I said, I'm here twice a week, every single week. And it's free. That's a pretty sweet deal. Any details you need regarding me, myself and I, they can all be found listed in the description down below. Your case suggestions can also be left in the comments. I go through them all, compile them all, put them on a big list, and then I do eventually cover them. Also, if you can, please hype up this video, give me your hype points, I really need them. I don't know why, but YouTube keeps telling me it's very important. So, hype points, please. I also want to know, do you think back in the day, do you think that you would have been convicted as a witch? I absolutely would. I fit the mould. I really love cats, have a birthmark, I'm opinionated, I get a bit snarky, I'm a bit sarcastic, like, oh God. The courts would have loved to see me coming back then. But anyway, without any further rambling and any further ado, let's get into the insane yet horrifyingly interesting case of the Scottish witch trials. Listen, I've got to say, before we even get into this video, I've got a shout out. And it's probably not the kind of shout out you're going to expect, but can we all just take a moment to appreciate spiders? As you can see, I've added cobweb to my background, and let me tell you, I've added like 4 chunks. It's no easy. These spiders be out here making cobwebbery, don't know if it's a word, but it is now, cobwebbery look like art. And I'm sorry, like, what if I... Oh, great, just had a white chicks moment. But like, look what I've done. I tried my best, and it's still not good enough. Cobwebbery is art, and anybody that can make that look good, I take my hat off to spiders. Anyway, into the case, and I am so excited for this one because we are going back to the Scottish witch trials. Now last year, you might remember, I did the Salem witch trials, and if you don't remember, I will link it down below. But when I done this, I did ask people, do you want to hear about the Scottish witch trials? And many of you said yes, but me being me, I forgot. And I was like, you know what? I'm just going to bank this one till next Halloween. And what a better time than October the 1st. Spooky season is officially upon us. And with that being said, let's go back to the 1500s. So, picture this. It is the 1500s in Scotland. Life is pretty miserable as it is. We've got freezing winters, then there's famine, then we've got the plague. Your neighbour's sheep are just mysteriously dropping dead. Your only entertainment that you have is the weekly gossip circle. Oh yes, people in history, they love to gossip. They actually gossip more than we do now, I would say. So then we enter the Witchcraft Act of 1563, and this was an act that basically said, if your life sucks, blame your neighbour, and then we will set them on fire. And I'm telling you, this is truly how easy it was to have someone's life taken away, to have someone burnt at the stake. Now, before this act, magic, it wasn't really a crime. And in fact, people really liked it. Like, if your baby was running a fever, you would call the local cunning woman. If your cow was refusing to produce milk, charm it. You have a sick husband, whisper some spells over his ale. Back in this time, it was almost deemed to be a type of medicine that people looked for and relied on. And every single person, they knew the rules, and mostly everyone got along. But this was until Calvinist preachers would turn up and say, you know that herbal tea you're drinking? That's actually Satan's smoothie. And suddenly, your sweet little granny round the corner who is just trying to heal people through herbal remedies, suddenly she's seen as Satan's side chick. No wee Granny Mary. And the thing is, with the Witchcraft Act, a lot of people believe that this happened purely because of religion, but let me tell you, this was village drama on steroids. People held grudges, even back then. Like, Margaret didn't return your butter churner, or Geoffrey's sheep keeps making eye contact with you. Now you could solve these petty feuds by making, a little witchcraft accusation. And it really was extreme back then. Like, if you had a mole, burn in hell. You like cats, burn in hell. You took a nap on a Sunday, let's turn you into toast. You spoke your mind as a woman, congratulations, you're being turned into ashes. Now, back in the 1500s, Scotland would become full-on Protestant. And ministers around this time, they started acting like they were God's neighbourhood watch. They would spy on everyone. They were dragging people into the kirks just for having a drink or maybe singing a happy song or, drinking on the Sabbath. But everyone at this point was basically judged for existing. And if something went wrong at this time, there was a bad harvest, there was terrible weather, which we should absolutely expect in Scotland. That kind of weather is all we know. Or the plague, or little Jimmy down the road fell in a ditch. This couldn't just be bad luck. It couldn't just be an accident. People believed that this was a satanic plot. And the culprit was most certainly always going to be the little lady down the road who has a cat and likes to drink tea. Now, these villages, they tended to be very small. They were quite isolated, and that meant that everyone knew everyone. And this seemed to make gossip incredibly powerful. And because of the Witchcraft Act, this meant that this gossip literally had the full weight of the law behind it. A minor grudge could escalate into capital punishment. You wouldn't just get a lecture because you scolded the neighbour's kid, you would be frickin' burnt alive. And this is where we're going to meet Bessie Dunlop of Ayrshire. She was a midwife, she was known to be a healer, and her crime that was going to get her murdered was the fact that she claimed that she had spoke to the spirit of a man called Tom Reid, and that Tom Reid had given her medical advice. I mean, imagine if you told someone today, like, oh, my dead uncle Gerald helps me win every time I play poker. They're going to roll their eyes, unless they're into that kind of thing, unless they believe in the paranormal, but likely they will roll their eyes. But in 1576 Scotland, you were going to be burnt alive. Now, Bessie's story, this would show how quickly folklore and survival skills, they would become a death sentence. And the reason for this is because law and religion, they had joined forces. There was no actual harm needed. There was no proof needed that you had done something to someone. Just supernatural contacts and a neighbour that never liked you. That is all it took for you to lose your life. Meanwhile, at this point, Scotland was absolutely freezing. They were experiencing something that would be known as the Little Ice Age. And this really hit hard. I mean, the winters, they truly were brutal. There was failed harvests and famine as a result of this Little Ice Age. Villagers were desperate and starving, and they needed someone to blame. They had to put their frustration somewhere. And you couldn't put it down to poor soil, bad weather, or a lousy sheep. It must have been that suspicious little woman down the lane. Now, climate historians, they do believe that the witch trials always seem to coincide with very harsh weather conditions. And I mean, honestly, it's easy to see why back in this time. Like, your turnips are freezing, your baby's falling sick, and your sheep die. Suddenly, a supernatural explanation kind of seems reasonable. Now, let's discuss what would get you put on the chopping block back in these days, because I'm telling you, every single one of us, we would find our heads on that chopping block. Because these symptoms, they are broad enough that they could be a frickin' BuzzFeed quiz. So let me ask you, friends, do you have a mole or a birthmark anywhere? You do? Well, you're a witch, aren't you? Because moles and birthmarks, any sort of mark that you had when you were born, this was considered a devil's mark. The devil gave that to you. You're one of Satan's spawns. Does anyone own a cat? Me? I own 2, and guess what? They are Satan's minions. You would be burned. Were you a doctor or a nurse or a midwife? Were you helping to heal the sick? Unnatural powers, you must be a witch. Being poor, old, or argumentative, God forbid we have opinions, you are a witch. Now, do you talk to yourself? Do you plan out little scenarios? Do you practice that awkward conversation in the mirror before you actually have it? You're consorting with the demons. Burn, baby, burn. And this is a cherry on top of the cake, right? Because see, if a child accused you, if a child just pointed at you, they can't even say mum or dad. They just point at you and they're like, goo goo gaga, you're a witch. Because why is that child pointing at you? You must be a witch, and they can sense it. And we can laugh now because obviously we're not living through it, but it was so ridiculous back then. Like, see if you got the weather correct. If you guessed that tomorrow was going to be sunshine, but instead it rained, you made that happen, you're a witch. But also, if you guessed that it would rain, and it did rain, how did you know that? You must be a witch. It was genuinely a time where you couldn't do right for doing wrong. There was no winning solution. You were just an issue. Now, I will say that in the early days of the Witchcraft Act, torture, it wasn't legal as such, not without Privy Council approval. However, as many people do these days, you can find a loophole in almost anything. So instead of being beaten or burned or prodded or whatever, you would be subjected to sleep deprivation, public shaming, and also starvation, all to coerce confessions. Even when torture wasn't legal, there would be some people who would do witch pricking, which basically meant they would poke your devil mark, so your birthmark or your mole, and they would see if you bled or if you flinched. If you did neither, you were a witch. But if you did bleed or you did flinch, they were going to fluke the results anyway. As you can probably imagine, back in this time, everyone is looking for someone to blame, so confessions, they were really sought after. Didn't matter who you were, what age you were, none of it. And I'm sure you can imagine, but under the level of stress, fear and torture that these people were put under, they were going to confess thinking it was going to save them, thinking if they give these people what they want to hear, that they might be set free, but that would never be the case. Even if they're begging you to give up a name of a witch and you say, it was Marjorie next door, you're still going to go and burn at the stake, but Marjorie's going to be strapped onto your back as well. By blaming someone else, it didn't free you, it just added someone else to the herd. And believe me, you could not talk about ghosts or fairies back then, because that is like you're trying to communicate with a different realm, and you need to go. And all of this already is batshit crazy as it is. It's only going to get crazier when King James VI, he enters the picture. We're talking about a man that has the ego of Kanye West and the paranoia of Alex Jones. And not only that, but he would also have the legal authority to turn a personal obsession into a state-sanctioned panic. This guy, he would personally interrogate witches. He even authored a book on demonology, like, okay, Ed Warren, are you also going to star in one of the Conjuring movies? And not only this, but this guy, he professionalised paranoia. So, things in Scotland at this point, they're already manic, they're insane. The plague, the famine, freezing weather, the starving villagers, the gran who grows her own lavender getting torched. But this situation was going to go from really bad to full-blown chaos as soon as King James VI entered this picture. So James was born in 1566 and he would be crowned as a baby, and he would grow up in a court of assassination plots, political backstabbing, and Calvinist ministers who were constantly whispering about the presence of the devil. Now, by the time this man reached his adulthood, he was intelligent, but he was insanely insecure. Not only this, but he was completely convinced that there were invisible enemies everywhere. He would whisper in hushed tones because you don't know who's listening. I might have like the ghost of Marjorie sat next to me right now and I wouldn't know. Marjorie, if you're here, knock twice. She must be sleeping. Now, a lot of people hear this part of the Scottish witch trials and they think, surely the king didn't believe in witchcraft. Sweet, sweet child, you are so innocent. I love to see it. But he really did. And he took it personally. And we might wonder, what set King James VI off? What happened in his life? What moment did he really start to believe, holy crap, there are higher powers that be that want to ruin this earth? Well, it would all start with his 1589 wedding voyage to Denmark. Let's just say there was some really bad stormy weather and it nearly sank his ship. Not only this, but it also delayed Anne of Denmark's arrival. And listen, I heard this through the grapevine. So, take it with a pinch of salt. But apparently there was a group of Danish witches that were at the helm of this. Apparently, these Danish witches, they cursed the sea. But listen, if King James asked you, that didn't come from me. So he hears about this, right? The Danish sea witches, they've tried to kill him. And he comes back to Scotland and he's like, well, I'll tell you what, no other witches around here are going to try and kill me. He believed that there was these witches, these women plotting against him and plotting his fate. And from this moment on, witches weren't just village nuisances. They were considered state-level terrorists. And these people, they weren't just allegedly whispering curses in the corner. Under torture, some of these witches, they were confessing that they had met the devil, some had kissed the devil, and there was one woman in particular that actually said she had sex with the devil. Whatever floats your boat, I am not here to judge. Others said that they would attend these midnight gatherings that was like, honestly, a cross between a rave and then also like a medieval PTA meeting. Now, if you know quite a bit of detail regarding the Scottish witch trials, then you've probably heard of the infamous victim Agnes Sampson. She was also known as the Wise Woman of Keith. She was a very respected woman within her village. She was known to be a healer, she was a midwife, but someone had pointed her out as a witch. So she goes into interrogation and they are just hammering her. She has been tortured in so many different ways, and she eventually confesses that she had been raising storms in the sea when King James was going to Denmark. Not only this, but apparently she would meet up with the devil on basically a bi-weekly basis for these elaborate meetings. Honestly, her confession, it reads like someone binge watching every single horror and fantasy series that you possibly could in 1590, with added torture-induced hallucinations. Can't forget the hallucinations caused by the sleep deprivation. This woman would be publicly humiliated. They would shave her head. She received the iron gag, which was known to be the dreaded witch's bridle, and we're going to get into all these devices later, so hang tight. But this was strapped onto her. She was also tortured with sleep deprivation. She was then strangled before she would be burned at the stake at Edinburgh Castle in 1591. Now, would it surprise you if I told you that the King James VI, he personally interrogated Agnes? Of course he did. And this is where the confession of raising storms in the sea had come from. King James, he had then said that he was left absolutely dumbfounded when Agnes started telling him about his own wedding night. She apparently told him things that only he and his wife would know. I don't know if it was about something that took place under the bed covers, but that's just vicious gossip. He puts this down to supernatural powers, but could it be, possibly, that she was repeating something that she had heard earlier on from King James him very self? That's what I would think. Now, another key figure that comes in is Dr. John Fian. He was a schoolmaster and he was accused of being the coven's secretary. This man's interrogation was basically medieval horror on steroids. His fingernails would be ripped off with pincers. His hands were pierced with iron pins. He would be crushed in iron boots, which was this vice-like device that splintered your bones. Now, this poor man, he actually was able to escape once. When he escaped, he completely recanted his confession. He was like, listen, you tortured me. Of course I'm going to say what you want to hear. But then he was caught again, and I think he kind of confessed the same stuff, and then he was executed. And his story would go to show that confessions under torture, this would get the authorities exactly what they wanted. And back in this day, and I mean, honestly, probably in this day in certain places, resistance would only mean more pain. It never ever meant any mercy. So remember I was saying that King James VI really thought he was Ed Warren, and he writes a book on demonology. Well, in this, he explained in this book that witches were traitors against God, and that they deserved death without any mercy. And this book, it would go on to become the ultimate handbook to magistrates, ministers, witch prickers. And this would be their handbook for decades upon decades. And of course, with the king's blessing, accusations, they would snowball from, local feuds to national panic. Because in people's minds, if the witches could attack the monarch, surely that means that no one is safe. I honestly feel like these people just needed to sit down with like a cup of tea, take a break, have a Kit Kat, talk to each other, and maybe come to their senses. Now, I told you a list of symptoms earlier that meant that you could be a witch. Would it shock you if I told you that over the years, over the decades, this list just grew and grew? Because of course, they need more reason to execute innocent people. So, basically, one of the symptoms were if you attended a midnight meeting whilst you were asleep. So you're asleep in your bed, but then like your spiritual body attends a midnight meeting with the devil or your local coven. Yes, I told you, this is all levels of crazy. If you knew any Latin or any herbal lore, you were a witch. And then if someone who was being tortured within their interrogation, if they named you, you're also a witch. If there was any storms, miscarriages or plagues that was happening nearby, I'm sorry to tell you, that was your fault because you're a witch. But in the eyes of the authorities and the magistrates and the ministers and King James himself, all these coincidences, they were circumstantial proof of devilry. Anything you told these people whilst under torture when you think you're trying to save your life, it was automatically true, and there were like no take-backsies. You said it, that's it. So I was telling you very briefly about witch prickers. Well, this became like a fully fledged business, and it was a good money maker. There was men like John Kincaid who would travel from parish to parish, jabbing terrified villagers with retractable needles. So this meant that when he's stabbing these people with the needles, they're not going to flinch and they're not going to bleed because the needle isn't actually penetrating the skin. This meant that he had another witch to take to the authorities and get executed. Now, these guys, the witch prickers, or maybe we should actually just call them the pricks. That works, the pricks. If the shoe fits, then get it on. But the witch prickers, they were paid per witch. And not only that, they would get a nice little bonus on top if their witch was executed. So it was in their best interest to fake the results. And authorities, they started doing a bit of record keeping. They were noting down how much tar they had to buy. They were also calculating the executioner fees, because everyone has to be paid fairly. Everything was meticulously recorded, like the tax man was coming to check at any moment. It's bureaucracy and terror going hand in hand. Then we come to the North Berwick witch trials, and they had executed at least 70 people over the span of several years. But more importantly, they also set the template for everything that followed. We had mass arrests, there was lurid confessions, royal obsession, international attention, and a cultural feedback loop that spread panic across the entire country. So this panic, it's nationwide. It goes to Aberdeen, it goes to Fife. And the borders, they joined in as well, all in this huge witch hunting frenzy. And the confessions, it's funny, they were always so bizarrely detailed. We have creatures who were shape-shifting into animals, flying over the rooftops, there was underground covens, and let's not forget, magical charms. And this was all taken very seriously by magistrates, ministers, authorities. People were naming their neighbours, they were naming their friends, even their frickin' family members. Some were even naming their own children. And then even the remote islands, they must have been feeling left out because they start joining in. So now we have Agnes Finney, and it is 1645 in Edinburgh, and at this time the city is just plagued by, well, the plague. People at this point are starving, they're sick, they're desperate. And Agnes, she was a shopkeeper that was known to have a bit of a temper. Haven't we all got a wee bit of a temper when something bothers us? But Agnes, she was accused of cursing a family nearby because apparently coincidence is now demonic. This family were really down on their luck. They were incredibly sick, especially the children. And it was blamed on Agnes because she's always a bit crabby, you know, and she sold us mouldy bread last week. Must have been Agnes. Like, someone sneezes after she scolded them about something. Burn her. She tried to defend herself. Burn her. The whole thing was just such poor timing for Agnes. And she would be convicted of witchcraft despite there being no hard evidence whatsoever. No real evidence. But I suppose this proved to people that the devil didn't need evidence to get his way. Meanwhile, in Fife, we've got a woman by the name of Bessie Tom, and she has found herself in quite the deadly gossip spiral. So what had happened is a neighbour of Bessie's, they had went to her and asked for some herbal remedies to try and help their sick child. Now this child drank the herbal tea, took the herbal remedies, and it still died, which is awful. But the family, they were so angry with Bessie because, you know, Bessie's meant to be a healer. Our child should still be alive. Quite clearly, she cursed our child. She must be a witch. And her story just grew arms and legs because next thing you know, Bessie was apparently seen consorting with the devil. Not only this, but suddenly she's visiting fairy hills. Someone else had heard that Bessie had been receiving magical herbs that was meant to hurt cattle. And I mean, back in the day, fairies were just simply folklore. It was a bedtime story. Now, in this time, this was some kind of pact with the devil. Because, you know, nothing says justice like misinterpreting a bedtime story for children. Meanwhile, at this point, torture had basically evolved into this full-time occupation. When it came to sleep deprivation torture, there was people known as watchers. And these watchers, they would be hired to basically stand guard and make sure that the accused witch never ever fell asleep. They would change out their shifts so they could go and have a nap, but God forbid wee Margaret in the cell gets some shut-eye. These victims were forced to sit or stand for days on end. They were in bright candlelight, they were shackled uncomfortably, they weren't allowed any sleep whatsoever, no breaks, and they started to hallucinate because they were so sleep deprived. And these hallucinations, they guaranteed confessions. And then we have the classic tools. So we've got the boots, which were basically these iron frames, like I said earlier, they splintered your bones, which, makes my skin crawl. There was the thumb screws that were designed to completely crush your fingers. There was these iron collars with hooks that kept you upright, so, you know, God forbid you nodded off, you'd nod right back up. Then the witch's bridle, which honestly to me might be the most disgusting of them all. This was an iron gag that had these really sharp prongs that would dig into the inside of your mouth and also your tongue. And the thing is, if this killed you, that's because you were a witch or a demon. But if you survived this, you must be a witch or a demon, because how the hell did you survive that? So it's said that by the 1620s, around that time, is when Scotland had perfected their recipe for a witch trial. This stemmed all the way from the accusation to detention in the toll booth, the pricking for devil's marks, sleep deprivation, formal torture, which sometimes they only got approval for after the fact. Then there was the forced confessions, the trial, the execution, and then the aftermath. So from 1629 to 1630, there was something that took place, and that was called the Great Hunt. Now this was across Aberdeen, Fife, and the Borders. Dozens would be executed. So we have Catherine Ross, and then her co-accused, Apparently they were attending fairy banquets under the ground, demonic baptisms, and apparently they all shapeshifted into hares. I mean, that's just another Monday. In Aberdeen still have records that are intact that shows that the community was actually budgeting for their rope, their tar, and paying the witch prickers and then paying the executioner. Like, this was in their daily budget. Were they paying taxes back then? Because I'm not gonna lie, I hate paying the tax man, okay? Are they paying for the rope and stuff like that? I wonder. Meanwhile in Edinburgh, we've got Janet Boyman. So Janet, she was tortured into confession, as how it goes. Now, she spoke about angels, minor demons, magical powders and charms, which of course was all influenced by the people who were doing the torturing. She would be strangled to death and then burnt near the castle like so many other of these women. By the late 1640s, Scotland, they had basically levelled up when it came to paranoia. Think of it as a Witch Hunt 2.0 deluxe edition. So, the Great Hunt, this was officially sanctioned by Parliament and also the Kirk. And this meant that these witch hunts, it wasn't rogue villagers with pitchforks all chanting and yelling. This was a state-backed witch hunting task force. Special commissions, they would travel across the country with a list of suspects, so a list of witches. And not only were they armed with this list, they were also armed with legal authority and also the little witch prick next to them. And let me tell you, with these witch prickers, do you know how I said like they would get a fee for doing the pricking and then they would get a bonus for actually finding something and getting them executed? They just jacked up their fee for every confirmed devil mark. And I kind of think of it as Uber, but instead of delivering food, you're just delivering this existential terror and got paid per burnt person. So then we have Margaret Barclay, and she got into a bit of a quarrel with a captain's wife over a ship. Yes, a literal ship. A storm came and then her neighbour's cat sneezes and suddenly Margaret is accused of cursing the vessel. After this, she's obviously a witch, the torture ensues, her legs are crushed in these boots, and every scream is basically paperwork. Because she confesses yet again under complete duress, naming other supposed witches, and then she's burned alive, all in a day's work. And during this period of time, these accusations, these were all snowballing, because one confession meant naming accomplices, which meant more arrests, which then meant more tortures, which meant more confessions, and it just went in this vicious loop. It's literally a domino effect of death and absurdity. These ordinary neighbours, suddenly they were witch witnesses, reporting any sign of misfortune. Your child has a rash, must be a neighbour who's a witch. Your butter curdled, your neighbour's a witch. Your 85-year-old cow died, must be a witch. And the most insane aspect of it is that all of these things, these were evidence. This was evidence that would hold up in court in the trials. Basically, all we need to know is that in Scotland, your life could be ruined by your own shadow. And ladies, if you're sitting here wondering, why is it always us? What do we do wrong? Why do people hate us? Well, I'm about to tell you, men are now entering the chat. I don't know if they were just running out of women to burn, but suddenly men are becoming frequent targets. Usually it was quarrelsome fishermen, Highland seers with second sight, or anyone with an unusual pet. Do you know back in this time, you could be accused of being a witch if you had a bad haircut? I'm not being funny, Vidal Sassoon was hardly cutting about back in the 1500s. What were we even cutting our hair with back then? Of course we're going to have bad haircuts. But apparently having a haircut like Lloyd Christmas and Dumb and Dumber meant that you had a pact with Satan. It's like, babe, no, I've got a pact with my butter knife that I tried to chop my hair with. I wanted face frame in pieces and suddenly I've got a fringe like a frickin' barcode. My apologies that my makeup is further ahead. My memory card just corrupted, so I am going to have to go back and tell some of this story again. I'm just going to stay calm. I'll just stay calm. Maybe it was the witches that corrupted my memory card. Anywho, so by the late 1600s, the Scottish witch hunt machine, it was running on fumes. The wars were over, famines were easing, and towns had officially burned enough widows, midwives, and random men for them to finally turn around and think, you know what, like, did we go too far? Like, this is maybe a bit out of hand. And yet this infrastructure of terror just remained. The kirk still preached, magistrates still nodded at confessions, and professional prickers, they were still travelling out to the countryside, like little freelance sadists with needles. And then we come to 1727 and we've got Janet Horne. She would be the last woman executed in Scotland. Now, she was a woman, she lived with her older daughter in Dornoch, and the accusation against them was that her daughter could actually turn into a pony at night and she would ride off to be with Satan. That's right, apparently Satan has like a stable full of ponies, and not only that, but apparently Janet, she was the head groom. And as ridiculous as this sounds, the court still went through the motions. Janet was paraded around town like some lunatic, and her reputation was completely tarred. And believe it or not, this woman would be burned at the stake, because apparently her daughter shapeshifted into a pony and rode off in the sunset. Now, her daughter survives, but she has lifelong stigma attached to her. I mean, she is literally half woman, half horse to some people. Could you imagine if Janet's daughter had children, and then those children are the children of the woman that apparently moonlights as a pony? I mean, that is childhood trauma packed up. Catnip for bullies, one might say. Now, it is quite important to note that by this time, the definition of a witch and witchcraft, it had kind of shrunk. By the 1700s, you didn't have to be attending these midnight meetings. You didn't have to be conjuring storms or consorting with the devil, because the main offences now were if you had healing charms, if you done fortune telling, if you casted love spells, or if you cursed livestock. Those were the main offences. Now, the Devil's Sabbath, that faded like last year's TikTok trend, fell off the map. But the superstition, this lingered like that smell in your kitchen that you can't quite find, but it's very much there, you just can't find the source. Now, there's cases like Lilias Addy from Torreburn that really shows just how much these ideas had stuck. Now, she died in prison, right? But she had actually confessed to having sex with the devil. Like, she must be the devil's main woman. This is what the locals are thinking. Like, that must be Satan's wife. So the locals, they decide once she's been executed, she needs to be buried under this big, massive stone slab. This was basically like putting someone in witness protection, making sure that they couldn't really arise again, because they believed that this woman would rise from the dead, or Satan would come and collect his wife. Now, her story would turn into legend, and this is just further proof that even when the courts start to calm down, the folklore, that continues to terrify ordinary people. Now, at this time, professional pricks, they still remained. They were still going around prodding everyone they possibly could, trying to identify a new witch to make their money. But John Kincaid, the one who was notorious for thousands of people being executed, he would be discovered as a fraud in 1662. And suddenly people are thinking, you know what, maybe these needle pricker people, maybe they're not the most reliable source for finding witches. But by that point, it's too late. Now, unfortunately, for anyone who was accused of witchcraft and was being put on trial, they would still face the torture methods, the boots, the iron gag, the sleep deprivation. It was just horrible and completely ruthless. And it's kind of around this point where all the accusations, they get really petty and personal. It's usually like a neighbour feud gone bad. Like, your neighbour's crops are better than yours. Oh my god, witch alert, you're jealous of that woman's hair. Oh my god, she's a witch. Or someone had unpaid debts. This was enough to land you in chains. But at this point, I will say that widows, healers and children, they were still incredibly vulnerable. But as time goes on, certain people, they find skepticism starts to creep in. The magistrates, they even start questioning these devil marks that they rode so hard for before. And they're thinking, you know, like, I've been thinking about these devil marks, and is it possible that they might actually just be a mole or a birthmark? Because I've just given birth and my child has one, but she's not a witch, right? Right? And the towns, they even started to realise, you know, maybe burning widows at the stake was actually counterproductive. And the Enlightenment ideas, they were creeping through many people, and they started to think, you know, maybe my milk didn't go curdled because there was a witch in the midst. Maybe I was storing it incorrectly or for too long. Yeah. So in 1736 would come the repeal of the Witchcraft Act, and this basically ended any legal witch hunting throughout Britain. So what it had done is it basically replaced capital punishment with laws against fraudulent fortune telling. So it's kind of like, you can lie about magic, you shouldn't, but you can lie about it and you'll not get burned. But, you'll still be punished. You just won't die for it now. But by this point, Scotland has already executed around 2,500 to 3,000 people. Innocent people who all lost their lives to this mass hysteria. And this number is horrifyingly large due to how small the population was. And yet the last sparks, the last witch execution of Janet Horne, that reminds us that these superstitions, they don't just die overnight. They linger, wrapped in folklore and local gossip. So by 1936, the Witchcraft Act is over. But the legacy was clear. Thousands of innocent people have lost their lives. Communities had been terrorised. Folklore had been codified into law. And superstition had been baked into Scottish culture. And of course, for the modern viewer, people like myself, people like you, it's horrifying, it's absurd, and in times it's occasionally darkly hilarious because it is so frickin' ridiculous. And what's so funny is, if we're all being honest and real for a second, probably like 95% of us would have been classed as witches back in the day. A lot of us love cats. A lot of us might like a wine on a Sunday. I'm going to guess that a lot of us are opinionated. I know I certainly am, as it comes in my videos. Like, if you accidentally breathed wrong back then, you were a witch. You couldn't win. And although the Scottish witch panic might have ended, the stories from it are still juicy, terrifying, and endlessly fascinating. Like, I could sit here all day. I could sit here and tell you about every single execution and all the details, but I would literally be here all day. Like, honestly, we think our neighbourhood drama is bad, but could you imagine you say a snark comment about your neighbour's vegetable patch? Better luck next year with those pumpkins, Alicia. She reports you. Suddenly you're getting whisked off in handcuffs, you're being tortured, and then you're being burned at the stake because apparently you're a witch. But I suppose, welcome to history. And whilst these executions might have ended, the paranoia, that didn't. That truly lingered like a bad smell in a cat's litter tray because, people were still paranoid. People were still gossiping and whispering. People were still blaming the weird woman with all the cats down the street for every misfortune they had in their life. And in a lot of communities, there were still stories and gossip about witches and fairies and shapeshifters existing within this realm. By the 1800s, people were still pointing out others in the street and being like, I bet she's a witch. She looks 99.999% witch. And I always think with these things, what's so fascinating is how social dynamics had fueled this whole situation from start to finish. Scotland's tiny, isolated villages had made everyone so hyper-aware of every sneeze, every crop failure, or every livestock mishap. The poor and the marginalised, like widows, spinsters, healers, midwives, anyone with an opinion or a frickin' cat for that matter, they were easy targets. Quarrel over a land, a family feud, a missed Sunday sermon, perfect material for a witch accusation. And we really can't forget the climate when it comes to the Scottish witch trials, because let's be honest, it's not a frickin' tropic island here, okay? The Little Ice Age truly did bring in the harshest of winters. And of course this meant famine, bad harvests. People were already so beaten down at this point that they were always going to look for someone to blame. Your baby's coughing up a lung, your sheep died in the snow, your turnips rotted. Someone had to be blamed. And a lot of people speculate, were they doing all this blaming and finger pointing because they didn't want to accept the harshness of their reality? They wanted to believe that by getting rid of someone would make their life better. But this wasn't the case. The circumstances were completely dire, but it was at no one's fault. And although this is history, and although it seems like it was such a long time ago, thousands and thousands of people were executed. That's families losing people that they love. It's families being scarred for generations. And whilst today we don't have the same paranoia and craze, we're not blaming people of witchcraft, we are always still looking for people to blame. People still love drama. People still blame their neighbours. People overreact to every slight thing. People still love something to gossip about, no matter how ridiculous and no matter who's affected by it. Like, could you imagine if TikTok existed back in the 16 and 1700s? This widow just healed a child with herbs. Could it be that she is Satan's side chick? Go to part 2 to find out more. Or like, could you imagine little old ladies on TikTok with like their wee herbs making teas and stuff like, guys, just got these new cow hoofs in and you can buy them from the link down below. Commissions paid. So what really is the takeaway from all of this? I suppose it's the fact that Scotland's witch trials, it wasn't just about evil or magic or religion. They were about fear, power, and gossip that was amplified to terrifying proportions. The law itself seemed to provide this framework, and then you've got the Kirk that provided the moral outrage, and then you've got the fricking king, the one who provided the obsession. And then of course you've got your neighbour who actually provided everyone with the motive. And usually for nothing more than the fact that you refused to let them borrow a cup of sugar. And again, if any of us lived back then, I'm sure we would all have been burned at the stake. Hey, maybe we were and were reincarnated, who knows? But the next time someone tries to tell you that history is boring, that it's uninteresting, just remember, somewhere in Scotland, centuries ago, your great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandmother, she could have been tarred, paraded and burned, all because someone's goat sneezed. But you know, I suppose welcome to history where gossip kills, fires apparently solve disputes, and being slightly different was literally lethal. But my loves, that is it for this true crime and makeup episode, and also this homicidal history. I really hope you found this one interesting. I love learning about history and the witch trials. I find it so freaking fascinating. If there's any other witch trials you would like me to cover, just let me know in comments down below. Don't forget to engage with this video in some way, like, comment, subscribe, share the video if you feel obliged, and if you feel even more obliged, hype the video up, because I need all your hype points. Any details you need regarding me, myself and I will be listed down below. That will include the product details that I've used on my face today. Let me know in the comments what case you would like me to cover next, but I think that's it for today. So with that being said, please remember, be a good person, do not be a bad person, stay safe, look after each other, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!